bringing a petition article back for a second time. So I hope to address that concern as I go through with some new things that happened and came out after town meeting in May 2015 and the decision made then. So first is, if
5 and 5 seconds.
Okay, thanks.
so if you're looking at the actual bylaw, the Safe Drinking Water Protection Act bylaw, it has an intent section like the other bylaws, and a bylaw is a town law, and in the town laws they have the intent and then the procedures. Well, the procedure is one line, and that's important. So just to cut away any confusion, we'll just kind of dissect that line first. So it says, no town board, officer, or committee shall require the addition of any substance to the public drinking water supply for preventative healthcare purposes unrelated to the contamination of drinking water. So I was very careful this time, based on feedback from last time. It was, I brought a resolution forward that said, town meeting opposes water fluoridation. And there was some feedback about what would that really do based on the different laws that we have. So this time I wanted to bring forward a bylaw, an actual town law. And the language I was very specific about. I actually copied this specific sentence from the, other than town board, from the National Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. So I've included that section of the U.S. Code. They have one line in the federal government Safe Water Drinking Act, same line, that prevents the federal government from requiring the addition of substance for preventative health care purposes. The only substance that today is done in that manner is fluoride. So the federal government, that's why the EPA can't, or any federal agency can't require fluoride be added at a national level. So U.S. Congress came out in the Safe Water Drinking Act and said, this doesn't belong here. So they added one line, no mention of fluoride, but they mentioned the line that would prevent fluoride from being added. Because water fluoridation started in the 50s, and someone, all different places started raising their hands saying, let's put fluoride into the water, there was no laws guiding it, right? People were just enacting this because it was happening around the state. So Shrewsbury did it in 1953 based on a town meeting vote. Massachusetts, so the federal government says, we're out of this business. The discussion shouldn't be here. At the state level, Massachusetts didn't have any laws at the time that we put this in. They came around later and had a referendum law where there had to be a referendum passed in order to put in. That got overturned, and they put in a new law that says the Board of Health has control to order the raising of the fluoride level. But they don't require it. So again, the Massachusetts at the state level doesn't require the addition of any substance for health care reasons. So they kind of said, we're not in this business, but we'll provide some guidance to say, if you're going to do this at the town level, the Board of Health is who's going to do that. And then if you look at it and you say, well, this used to be or should be a doctor-patient type relationship. So if you look at your doctor can't require you take any substance for preventative health care measures. So you've got this, and in the end, the individual has a decision. So what happened here is you have the federal government saying, not for discussion here, state, not for discussion here, we're not going to require it. The town requiring it, your doctor not being able to require it based on the code of ethics. So there's kind of this loophole that's open. There's kind of this place that's left open that says the town can do it, that a town board can do that. So that's where this is really trying to take language from the federal government and put it here and say, this isn't where this conversation should be had either, right? This should be a conversation between a person, an individual, and their doctor or their dentist, not a town meeting to decide what we should be adding, not referendums deciding what should be added. It really should be the individual that makes that choice. So this actually, by passing this bylaw, will fill that loophole, just like they did at the national level, to say nobody can require it at the town level either, and restore that right to informed consent back to the individual making that decision for themselves. So that's where I kind of wanted to walk over that. That's one line. Doesn't mention fluoride, but yes, there is only one substance that we do this for, which is fluoride. So enacting this would actually...
Can I just interrupt you?
Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I appreciate you giving us this information, and I appreciate that you listened to suggestions. This was good.
Oh, good, thanks.
The reason the federal government doesn't require it, or the state government, does not necessarily mean for the reasons that you're stating. I think that's your interpretation of why they don't require it. There's a lot of things that the federal and state government does not require regarding health-type situations, but it doesn't mean they don't have an opinion of it. So the state and the federal government isn't telling cities and towns, on the flip side of what you're saying, to take it out of the water.
Yep.
So they're not taking a stand either way.
Correct.
Okay, I just wanted to
Yep,
be sure.
they're not
we were-
saying you can't do
Okay.
this, and actually, they're leaving it open for the town to be able to do it, right? Especially Massachusetts is saying, yeah, if you want to do it, the Board of Health can do that. So that's a great point, because that's going to transition into the kind of intent section where it says, this is really a bad idea. This is
Where are you reading from now? Do we have
So if
that?
turning back on, this is actually on the actual bylaw. So in the bylaw, we had the one sentence we went over, and that's kind of where it came from. So I wanted to go over that so that we understood the origins of that. And just one thing to add too about, because there was some confusion in past presentations that I have, that there are two sections. There's that you cannot add a substance to the public drinking water supply for preventative healthcare purposes. That specifically and only applies to fluoride, unrelated to contamination of drinking water. That's specifically in there to say you can add whatever you want to the water to make the water safe. So it doesn't interfere with anything that the water commissioners or superintendents want to do to make the water safe. Just pH, add chlorine, all of that is to treat the water. So that's why the government put it in at that upper level in the federal government too, is to say treat the water however you want, make it safe to drink, but don't require anything to treat the people. So that's the differentiation in that line. So that this won't be construed to prevent any other measures that the water superintendents
You don't
take in the
require it
future.
at the federal level.
Right, yeah, and then this bylaw would do the same here. Right. All right, so just to make that clarification up front too. So if I go to the intent, it's saying, this is a bad idea. It's a bad idea to do this, and why would it be a bad idea to add fluoride to the water? Number one, it violates informed consent. So that's where this packet I gave you, and why, we don't really have this guidance, right? All the other governmental levels are saying, I don't want to touch this. Somebody else do it. We're not
Mr.
going
Moss,
Yeah.
if we're announcing that we're putting fluoride in the water, how is that going against informed consent?
Good question. So here I have, right here in the American Dental Association, I have the first printout for you, so if you want to reference that, it'll answer that question. So here's the American Dental Association statement on dental patient rights and responsibilities. This is right off the ADA site, and what's interesting, the first highlighted part I had missed before, but it is an important part. Let me just quote it from the ADA. It was envisioned that the patient rights document would also serve to remind patients and dentists of the importance of informed consent by involving patients in treatment decisions in a meaningful way. So I thought this was even more important because it's talking about, not only is it just the one line I'm going to reference, but this whole statement of patient rights, every single line, the 9 or the 20 or so patient rights and responsibilities. They wanted to remind us that all of those are written so that we could preserve and informed consent and the discussion that happens between a patient and doctor when
Can I
informed
just ask
consent.
you?
Yeah.
Okay, so they're referring to when someone writes a prescription and they're prescribing something as opposed to something that's given either over the counter or in a public water supply. It's apples and oranges. It's not the same thing. So this refers to when someone is giving them treatment.
That's right.
Treatment is different.
It's a very good point, because when we say apples and oranges, is exactly what I said before, is it should be apples and apples. We should, by taking the prescribing pen and giving it to a board of a town and saying everybody is going to get prescribed this substance, it puts it into a...
But that's not what's happening.
Excuse me.
Sorry.
You gotta direct your questions to
Sorry.
the chair.
Go ahead.
My apologies, Don. That's not what's happening here. This is not forced medical treatment. When is the last time you were held down and injected with fluoride? Informed consent is a very serious medical ethical issue and legal issue, and to somehow equate this first world problem of the water department providing fluoride in the water as somehow being violating informed consent gives a lie to what real violations of informed consent are. This is a provision of a supplement in something in which the customers have a choice. Choice is what consent is about. You may not like the choice, but that doesn't mean that you aren't choosing it. Just because they're putting fluoride in the water and you don't want them to put fluoride in the water doesn't mean that you don't have legitimate information and that you haven't consented to it. I mean, is someone pouring water into you? You can filter the water, you can buy bottled water, you can dig your own well if you want. Those may not be great options, you may not like them, and they may be expensive, but that doesn't mean it violates informed consent. Now, there's very good arguments pro and con for fluoride, but it really scares me when I see informed consent batted about so casually. The medical and legal ethics take it very seriously, and it seems like it's not what you're doing here. You're just saying, hey, there's an informed consent. That sounds good. I'm going to use that.
Yep. No, it's a good point. I would say, I'm scared as well that when we look at our basic human right of what we do to our bodies, that it's taken away from that doctor-patient relationship and put at a community level. And actually, the UN, some of the information that I didn't print off today, but I did provide you, the UN had some statements to make about that. Article 6 in the UN Declaration of Bioethics and Human Rights, they actually state, in no case should a collective community agreement or the consent of a community leader or other authority substitute for an individual's informed consent. So you're right, by the community doing this, it doesn't mean we haven't given our informed consent. So that's part of the discussion here, is to say we haven't given our informed consent. So by putting it in the water, then you have to ask yourself the question of forcing it on people. But then I would ask the question, would you want to ask a low-income family, go buy bottled water? Can you go buy bottled water or install an expensive reverse osmosis filter? Because you can't filter fluoride out with a carbon filter. There's several $1,000s to buy a reverse osmosis.
Can I answer that question you asked? That's a terrible option, but that's still an option. I'm very well aware of how doctor-patient relationships work, because that's what you're talking about here. And even sometimes doctors come to patients with terrible choices, and the patients have to make terrible, expensive choices. But it's still informed consent. And even if it's a choice that they don't like or can't afford and have to come around some other way to do it, that is real informed consent. It's not a good choice, but it's a choice. So if you want to discuss the merits of fluoridation or the merits of how we work our water system, okay. But again, you seem to misunderstand what informed consent is all about. UNESCO is very concerned about lack of consent and the way, throughout world history, governments and communities have abused people. And that's a very serious consideration, and that's a very serious problem. But that's not what this is. If this was that, I would be all on board, and I'd be saying, oh my God, my rights are being violated. But I have a choice. And it's not just because I can afford to change how I get my water or build my own well and so forth. It's a choice, and that's what informed consent is. It's not good choices, it's just choices.
Right. So hopefully I'll have you on board by the end of this. But
Chief.
Just one quick, I think we ought to let him make his full presentation here before we continue interrupting here. Let him make his presentation, and then we'll go back and
Good
ask
point.
you questions.
all right, so so this is trying to give another perspective on informed consent from the ADA, where it's really trying to preserve that for an individual. Then if you turn to the second page on the end, it actually gives the actual patient right, which is you have a right to accept, defer, or decline any part of your treatment recommendations. So that's where we're trying to say that, though the Massachusetts Department of Public Health can recommend that an optimal level is 0.7. That's only a recommendation. So this is where we're trying to pull that informed consent back to the individual to say, I have a right to decline whether I want to take fluoride or not. Somebody else I would respect if they wanted to take fluoride. I would respect their choice as well. So that covers informed consent. The main one that I think in my discussions with people, that's what it will eventually come back to. Second is no control over who gets it. So it's delivered indiscriminately to everybody, regardless of age, health, nutritional status, and without the individual oversight by a doctor. I don't know if anybody knows this, but not everybody can drink the water in town because there's fluoride in it. And just a reference, in 2006, the National Research Council of the Academy of Sciences report on fluoride in drinking water designated kidney patients, diabetics, seniors, and babies as susceptible subpopulations that are especially vulnerable to harm from ingested fluorides, which is what we're doing when we're drinking water with fluoride in it, not brushing our teeth and spitting it out. And also, according to that NRC report, there's substantial evidence that fluoride exposure can impact the thyroid function in some individuals. So, if you go to, some of the stats on that is 1 in 8 women have a thyroid issue. So that's a large population of people that have thyroid issues.
You mean 1 in 8 in Shrewsbury or 1 in 8?
That's from like a Department of Public Health site.
So 1 in 8 anyway,
Yeah, they were saying 1 in 8.
whether there's fluoride in the water or not.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Right, correct. That's irregardless of fluoride. Just saying
Okay.
in America, in America is 1 in 8. And I'm just relating that to this a large population that directly relates to this report, saying that they could be susceptible subpopulations. So what's new? So I know there's a question. So next in the packet is what's new. So a month after I presented in town meeting in May 2015, the American Thyroid Association came out with a publication in Clinical Thyroidology. Is fluoride drinking water associated with higher prevalence of hypothyroidism? So it's this one here, which is after the ADE one. What are the implications of this study? This data suggests that people residing in regions with drinking water fluoridation have a higher risk of developing hypothyroidism than those living in regions without drinking water fluoridation. So this is just something that came out, from a reputable source. The U.S. Department of Public Health, sends you to the Office of Women's Health, who then links you to American Thyroid for more information on thyroid. So I wanted to bring a reputable article that came out after town meeting. So that kind of describes that not everybody can drink the water in town. The next part is there's no control of dose or dosage. Something that's come out that's new is the new water treatment plant. So this is one of the major reasons why I'm bringing this forward. Not because of the water treatment plant. I'm in full support of that. But it has a relationship. It will help us understand why fluoride matters. And that's because we're spending $14.5 million to build a new water treatment plant. A major driver of that is to remove manganese from the water. Manganese has been causing the discoloration of water, but also can cause neurological and behavioral effects. That's from the information that we get on the Shrewsbury website. So these are the kind of aesthetics that we're trying to prevent by spending the money on this water plant, and then also the health issues that we're trying to avoid by lowering that limit, lowering the amount of manganese in the water. Now, what does manganese have to do with fluoride, right? That would be the question. So if you look at the next thing that I printed off here, which is straight from the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, if you go to the Shrewsbury site, information on manganese, and you click on that site, and you click on more information, for more information on manganese, you go to the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. Well, they have a bunch of documents there, one being a comprehensive list of studies related to drinking water exposures in infants and children. So I opened that up because I was interested in the manganese. I read through it. Well, the second article here, if you can see my highlighted section, so this was prepared by the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, Office of Research and Standards. Since 2006, epidemiological studies have documented 6 additional developmental neurotoxicants: manganese, fluoride, etc. So, using a reputable source, our own website, tracing through the Mass Department of Environmental Protection, looking at their Office of Research, they've compiled a publication here from the Lancet that is talking manganese and fluoride as developmental neurotoxins. So you can look at that we're trying to reduce the levels of manganese, which is a good thing. I applaud the efforts of Water Superintendent Mr. Tedeschi to be ahead of the game and to reduce these levels, to be out ahead of any of these health effects that could be gotten from manganese. So while I think as a town, it would be a great thing to spend our money on doing that, we need to take a look at what fluoride, which is listed in the same category Alongside, you'll notice if you read up from that, there's 11 of them. The other ones include lead, arsenic, mercury, fluoride, manganese. This is kind of in a grouping that, you wouldn't want to be in, but it is. Fluoride's in that grouping. So why does this matter as far as control of dose? So it's a developmental neurotoxin, right? These are low levels. Well, manganese, we're talking levels around 0.3 parts per million where a health advisory would be issued. We naturally have fluoride in the water, calcium fluoride in the water at levels of 0.05 parts per million to 0.1 parts per million. So our natural fluoride levels that occur when the water goes through the different rocks and stuff is around 0.1 parts per million. We're artificially adding a chemical from the phosphate fertilizer plants. They're hazardous waste, which the Mass DEP also categorizes in their Toxic Use Reduction Act list of toxic and hazardous chemicals. Fluoride is listed, as well as at the national levels. We're taking that substance, which is not the naturally occurring substance levels that we're talking about, and we're adding it to bring the level from 0.1 naturally up to 0.7. So that you can see that we're raising the levels. When we talk about, like, it used to be thought that the poison's in the dose, but now we know with lead, mercury, arsenic, and all these other, dose, it's not really poison. A poison's a poison. So we're adding it at these levels that we're talking about with manganese that we're trying to reduce below those levels. One developmental neurotoxin we're trying to reduce the levels along those lines. Another one we're trying to raise in efforts to improve somebody's teeth. So I just wanted to kind of link those two together for you so you can see we're talking the same levels, these small, minute, 0.3, 0.7. We're talking very low levels of this, where we're trying to reduce one with our new water treatment plant and we're raising the other with the water fluoridation plant. Why that matters with dose is, if I drink a glass of water, Mr. Adler drinks a glass of water, we've gotten the same dose for the day. So even though we can control the concentration of 0.7, we can't control the dose. If we each drink a glass of water, we've got the same dose of fluoride. If I drink 5 glasses of water, and Mr. Adler drinks 1 glass of water, I've got 5 times the dose of fluoride that he drank, 50% of which is excreted through the kidneys. The other 50% is stored in your bones. So you can understand that a lifetime of drinking fluoride, half of everything you've drank in fluoride is stored in your bones. Now what makes it even more concerning, which is why with manganese they talk a lot about the relation to drinking water exposures in infants and children, is because the dosage is different than dose. So concentration is 0.7. Dose is the amount in one day. Dosage is the amount divided by how much you weigh. So if I drink 5 glasses of water and a newborn infant, 0 to 6 months, drinks 5 bottles of formula-fed mixed with tap water, fluoridated tap water, their dosage is off the charts as far as they're the most highest dosed individuals in the entire community. Hence why infants 0 to 6 bottle fed are getting the highest dosage in the community, and yet fluoride is classified as a developmental neurotoxin. So I'm concerned about that. I know there's a lot of people in the community that are concerned about that, so there's why adding it to the water is not a good idea. So that covers that one. Next one is I wanted to bring another thing that came out a month after. A lot of this came out a month after my presentation, but the next part of the packet is from the Cochrane collaboration. So the Cochrane collaboration is considered to provide the gold standard in evidence-based reviews of health science by doctors and researchers. And they found no reliable evidence that fluoridation prevents cavities. So the Cochrane collaboration, gold standard, international organization, comes out with a review of all of the studies available. And I just wanted to go over that was the summary of they had it in the news article, but to go right to the actual results of their study, here's their key results. Our review found that water fluoridation is effective at reducing levels of tooth decay among children, supporting community water fluoridation. However, next line in that paragraph, or end line, these results are based predominantly on old studies and may not be applicable today. So that has a little bit of question there. Within the before and after studies we're looking at, we did not find any of the benefits of fluoridated water for adults. So again, that's right, we're treating everybody. Where if this is saying we found no evidence, no studies proving evidence that it helps adults, now you've got this whole population taking this substance that don't need it. We found insufficient information about the effects of stopping water fluoridation. So there's no evidence that if you stop it, that anything, we don't know at all. You know, it's not, there's no study showing that you're gonna get more cavities. We found insufficient information to determine whether fluoridation reduces differences in tooth decay levels between children from poorer and more affluent backgrounds. One of the most important findings of the study, one of the most pro-fluoridation statements is that, you know, we've got to reach the lower income people in poverty that need this most. This is saying there's no studies that prove that water fluoridation reduces it based on socioeconomic status. So, and then overall, the results of the studies reviewed suggested that where the fluoride level in the water is 0.7 parts per million, which Shrewsbury has, there's a chance of around 12% of the people having dental fluorosis that may cause concern about how their teeth look. So there is a risk to this. There is a bad outcome to this. Dental fluorosis is the outward sign of fluoride over exposure when you're young. The exact time you don't want to be overexposed to fluoride because it's a developmental neurotoxin. So we have so this is, I just wanted to bring, this is gold standard Cochrane review study that came out with a bunch of key results that don't show that this is good for everybody, safe and effective for everybody. There are causes for concerns on the merits of the benefits as well. So we talked about some of the costs.
Excuse me, did you read the back page too?
I read the whole thing, yep.
Because it says there's insufficient information to determine the effect of stopping water fluoridation.
Yep.
Programs also.
That's right, yep. So financials, I wanted to bring, this is the last part in the packet. CDC, I'm going to bring their own cost savings of community water fluoridation, because I know last time around we discussed the $1 that you invest, you get $38 back. So there's been 2 published studies by the CDC, 2, where they say $1 invested in this preventative measure yields approximately $38 in savings in dental treatment costs. So what I'm highlighting there is dental treatment costs. Notice that's your savings. Dental, I've just mentioned potential concerns with thyroid, potential concerns with children's brains. This isn't overall medical costs. This is only dental costs. And then the last statement in there, for instance, a 12-year-old child who has lived in a non-fluoridated community in a highly fluoridated state would typically have 1 fewer cavity than a child in a low fluoridated state. So we're a high fluoridated state. If we weren't to fluoridate, this is all about 1 cavity. And then just to talk about savings. So if this bylaw is passed at town meeting, this saves the town money. So what does it save? I checked with Mr. Tedeschi, and he checked with the consultants. When we build a new water treatment plant, they're going to, right now, are designing and to install the fluoridation equipment that we would need. To purchase and install the fluoride equipment would be $27,000. So if we pass this amendment, we would save that $27,000. We currently spend $10,000 a year for the actual fluoride to put in the water. We would save $10,000 a year in the fluoride that we put in the water. And just a reminder that more than 99% nobody ever drinks. It ends up in your toilets, your lawns, your showers. So the money that's associated with that, 99% of it's being wasted because it's going to other places other than the teeth. And then this I found out thanks to some research with Mr. Tedeschi as well, is that because I did notice that with the lowering of fluoride, because right before town meeting, it used to be 1 part per million, but then the Department of Public Health came out and said there are other sources. When we made this 1 part per million long ago in the 60s, this recommendation, now we've got so many sources of fluoride, they're getting overexposed. We've got 41% of adolescents aged 12 to 15 have dental fluorosis. So they're finding that everybody's overexposed to fluoride. So they said, well, there's so many sources of fluoride, we're going to reduce it. So they actually lowered the concentration to 0.7. When they did that, I noticed a drop in the potassium hydroxide that we needed to do. And some of that is because hydrofluorosilicic acid is a very corrosive acid, very, very, very low pH. So we need to correct for that and add potassium hydroxide to bring that up. So just based on estimates, we could save $10,000 to $30,000 a year if we pass this article and not having to spend for the potassium hydroxide to adjust the pH that fluoride, fluoride would bring it down, and then we got to bring it back up again. So you could look at savings yearly, 20 to 40,000 a year of savings. That's new information that I had last time. I thought it was just the fluoride, but there are some other costs. But most importantly, this saves one of our most valuable possessions, our personal freedom over what is done to our body.
Thank you. Any questions by members of the board?
I just got one point.
Sure.
Great presentation. I don't know if the moderator is going to let you talk for 35 minutes on the floor at town meeting, so you might want to tighten it up a little bit.
We did interrupt him a bit, though. in
We
between.
did.
Any questions? Does the Board of Health have anything to comment on?
Well, Steve Hitchens, the chairman of the Board of Health, I just wanted to comment that Mr. Moss did come before the Board of Health at our last meeting, August 31st, and made a presentation that the main thrust of that presentation was not so much on the potential benefits or adverse health effects of fluoride, but it was who gets to decide if fluoride is added to the water or not. So it really came down to not really a health impact issue, but more of a legal issue as to who is authorized to make this decision. And as Mr. Moss said, the Shrewsbury Town Meeting made this decision back in 1952. Last May, Town Meeting also made the decision to continue fluoridation. So in that light, the Board of Health voted 3-0 to not recommend the passage of this article.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a comment.
Sure.
Also, Maria Narducci, I'm the doctor in the Board of Health. I guess the thing is, it comes down to really an ethical question, which I think Mr. Adler was trying to get at. And I'm going to come up here. I think the question is, who makes medical decisions for us, right? And there's plenty of other examples. There's folic acid in some of our grains to try to cut down on neural tube defects. There's vitamin A and D in our milk to help with our bones. We wear seat belts to prevent accidents. And nobody asked me about the seatbelt thing. They said I had to, I think, because people decided it was in our best interests. And so I think that's the case with fluoride. I think the most recent thing that came out, did you see Australia? Did you see the Australia thing? It was on a website, I Love Science website. Bryan knows what I'm talking about. So Australia just went through this most recently, and they reviewed like 3,000 articles trying to figure out about the toxicity and all the things we talk about, cancers, toxicity, IQ, all that stuff. And they concluded the same as our country has concluded, that really it seems that the benefits outweigh potential risks. And so that country will continue to recommend fluoridation. So then you come back to this discussion, and I think you're asking lay people to try to assess the medical literature after every medical organization has repeatedly looked at it and said, we think this is a good thing. So then you're bringing it back to the individual, and not really every individual, but the 240 town meeting members.
This would bring it back to every. This would say pass this.
Only
It's if town meeting passes this, then it goes back to individual decisions.
Right, so the 240 town meeting members will take it away from the 30,000 residents and allow those 35,000 people to individually decide.
Yeah, with their doctor. So it would inevitably just say, if it's passed, that the Board of Health can no longer make the order to require it, and therefore people would have to go to their doctors and say, I live in a non-fluoridated community, can I have fluoride supplements?
Right, so I guess the concern is some of the benefits are seen in parts of the community that may not be represented. And so that's a real concern, that there was parts of the, there's always parts of the community that don't get represented, and they're sometimes at more risk than the people that are here today, tonight, Monday night. And I think that's what you want your medical community to do, is look out for everybody. It's a much broader impact than you and I in Shrewsbury. World Health Organization, CDC, said this was one of the biggest public health advances in the 20th century. Right? That's a huge thing. That's not just you and I trying to figure out if it's good or bad. That is a huge thing. And so I guess
I think it's an ethical question. I think Mr. Adler probably got it. And I guess that would be the argument for why, at the end of the day, you sort of try to listen to your medical organizations, because they're in theory, they're looking out for your best interest, and they're not trying to harm people. And so they assess that stuff all the time, and that's what they consistently conclude.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to be heard? Please stand and state name.
Sure.
Precinct. Also.
I'm Rob Halpern, Precinct 9. So I just want to respectfully disagree with a bunch of what was just stated because, for example, it's not the case that all medical organizations or practitioners have universally agreed fluoride is a wonderful thing. In fact, it's very up in the air, and I personally have 2 practitioners of my own who advise me directly not to have any. Second thing is, it's also a little bit disingenuous to compare the idea of fluoride in water to fluoride in milk, to fluoride in, I don't know, a baked good. Water is ubiquitous. It's essential for life. You have no choice other than to drink water. Regarding informed consent, if my son goes over to another kid's house, says, gee, Mrs. Smith, I'm thirsty, and Mrs. Smith gets him a glass of water from the tap, does he have informed consent? That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Can I answer that? Since
Sure.
if the kid says, Mrs. Smith, I have a headache, and Mrs. Smith says, here's an aspirin, it seems like the same thing. It's not a doctor treating it. That kid is 6 years old and doesn't know how to give informed consent. You can't expect a 6-year-old to do informed consent. The parent is looking out for the child and the guests of the house. I understand water is ubiquitous. You bet it certainly is, and it is absolutely needed. And I'm not saying that now they should not be getting water. It's that there are other options, and no one is forcing you to drink this product that is provided by the town. It's a product provided by a utility, like the electric company, like the schools, like the library. And if you don't like some part of it, you either reject that, get something else, but you don't say, this is violating my rights.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Can
you.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of like an ethical debate that doesn't
Yeah.
seem. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
I have something written, so I'll be quick.
Okay.
Follow the script.
All right. Give us your name and precinct,
Yes,
please.
yes. Hi, my name is Naomi Halpern, and I live in Precinct 9 also. And I've lived in Shrewsbury for 15 years. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and my 2 sisters, Leslie Stambler and Julie Boris, who are also longtime Shrewsbury residents. And we strongly support the Safe Drinking Water Protection Bylaw. And the reason is that we're not comfortable with any substance being added to our public water supply as a preventative treatment. To do so goes against bioethics and common sense because dosage and individual needs cannot be reliably controlled or accounted for. The decision whether to take a preventative treatment or not is one that should be left up to individuals with the advice of their doctor. That said, we would like to add that we are especially not comfortable with an understudied, unnatural, non-pharmaceutical grade substance classified as a neurotoxin and an endocrine disruptor called, how do you pronounce it, hexafluorosilicic acid being added to our drinking water as a preventative treatment. It may be interesting for some to note that my sisters and I are the children of an orthodontist and a dental hygienist, and we were raised in a household believing fluoridation was really good for us. So challenging this firmly held belief did not come easily at all. After personally spending a great deal of time, though I'm not a doctor, reviewing the National Research Council's scientific fluoride review on EPA standards and other more recent reputable sources that Bryan has mentioned, it's become abundantly clear to me that the cumulative effects of fluoride on whole body health has not been adequately studied. It hasn't. And in fact, can be harmful. It's a big question mark. It's important to note that the NRC, as you know, is a completely neutral entity which reviews all the studies and makes recommendations to the EPA. And throughout the report, it stated multiple times that more research is required in order to determine the cumulative safety of systemic effects of fluoride on whole body health. Any medical professional will tell you that before they prescribe a medication, it's essential to confirm the appropriateness of the medication given given the following variables: individual health status, the dosage, the side effects, and how it interacts with other substances being ingested. None of this is possible when a medical treatment agent is added to a public water supply prophylactically. Both my primary care physician and my dentist are strongly opposed to artificial public water fluoridation, as are increasing numbers of very respected medical professionals today. As a patient, we all have the right to choose or refuse our doctor's recommendations. The Safe Drinking Water Protection Bylaw will allow everyone the freedom to choose. This bylaw does not prevent anyone from taking fluoride or any other substance if they believe it's necessary for their own preventative health purposes. But we also firmly believe it's highly unethical for a governmental body to make that decision for the entire community, depriving the individual of choice. We ask you to consider this. Does it really make sense to put the unknown oral health benefits of fluoride over the likely cumulative harm it is causing other body systems, such as the skeletal or endocrine system? If Shrewsbury adopts the Safe Drinking Water Protection Bylaw, it will simply ensure each individual's right to choose. So in closing, I'd just like to note that I'm both willing and able to install a private water filtration system, which of course neutralizes the fluoridation issue for me personally. I am here tonight rather because of my belief in the injustice of depriving others the right to choose. If you have not yet, I strongly encourage you to review the very well-researched and compelling Brockovich report that I forwarded to you all previously. And thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to be heard?
Good evening. My name is Catherine Rajwani. I live at 12 Old Colony Drive in Precinct 7. My parents grew up in Shrewsbury. I grew up in Shrewsbury, and I'm now raising my own children in Shrewsbury. I'm a chemical engineer and an attorney. I come here today to voice my support for the passage of the Safe Water Protection Bylaw. While I support the science behind not adding fluorosilicic acid to our water, and the ethics behind allowing individuals to make their own health decisions, my comments here today focus on cost and risk. From a purely financial perspective, we should not, as a town, support the continued addition of fluorosilicic acid to our water. To be accurate, I say fluorosilicic acid because that is what we are adding. We're not adding naturally occurring fluoride or the type of fluoride that's found in toothpaste or even pharmaceutical-grade fluoride. We're adding a byproduct created during the production of commercial fertilizer. Fluorosilicic acid cannot be released into the air or into rivers or lakes because it's a pollutant. When it fully breaks down in our water to form fluoride ions, it leaves behind silicon compounds and hydrogen ions, thereby increasing the acidity in our water. This increased acidity downstream of the water plant can result in an increase in the amounts of lead in our drinking water. The addition of fluorosilicic acid to our town drinking water is an added cost to our town. Any potential benefit, which I don't see, is not gained by the town. From a town finance perspective, it's a lose-lose scenario. We as a town spend money on expensive equipment. We purchase fluorosilicic acid from the chemical fertilizer industry to assist them in its disposal. We undergo the risk and expense of administering it to our community. How does the town benefit? We don't. It would make more fiscal sense to eliminate the expenditures associated with fluoridation. This would be a real benefit experienced by the town, both in the short and the long term. In the short term, the fluoridation money could be reallocated to other more important town priorities. The long-term savings to the town would be the avoidance of the litigation risks associated with fluoridation. We can argue about the science, and we can argue about the ethics. There is no argument concerning cost and risk. There is no upside to the town for the sunk costs and the associated risk. There is a real risk and potential liability associated with the town's fluoridation of its water. Litigation can and has resulted in other towns. There are studies tying fluoride with a number of detrimental health consequences, such as lower IQs in children, neurotoxic effects, early onset of puberty, lower thyroid function, reproductive problems, bone damage, and cancer. Once these studies are further substantiated and widely accepted by the medical community, the town can become liable for the resultant injuries. If our town meeting members decide now to stop adding fluorosilicic acid to our drinking water, we will immediately start saving money and continue saving into the future. We will also minimize our town's liability with regard to future lawsuits. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to be heard? Yes, sir.
Jeff Howland, town engineer. As I told the selectmen the other night, I'm fluoride neutral. If a town meeting decides that they want to add fluoride, the water department will add fluoride. Town meeting decides not to, water department will not. I think the concern that I have is with section 2 of the procedure. It does not say fluoride. It says any substance. And what I don't want to have in the article or in the bylaw to saddle the current or any future water superintendent of adding something to the water that's required. Keep in mind, we're doing a water treatment plant for manganese. Manganese is not a primary contaminant. It's a secondary contaminant. Secondary contaminant, by the state's definition, is an aesthetic property of the water that can affect taste, odor, color, or the cosmetic effects that may cause skin or color or tooth discoloration. It is not a primary contaminant. You could argue that taking the manganese out is regular to health, not for the contamination, but it's not a contaminant. So I think we have to be careful on the wording. If the wording is for fluoride, you say fluoride, not any substance. Because as the water changes, as if we have to buy water from another entity, if we have to get water or water changes in our wells, and the chemistry will change. We don't want to saddle the water superintendent at any time that he has to change the chemicals that get added. So I have to be careful on how that works, because legally, to me, this says any substance not used for the contamination, and technically only contamination is chlorine. Because pH control is not a contaminant. Northborough's pH is 9.5 in their water system, ours is 7.5. There's a big difference. They put theirs at 9.5 for a different reason why Bob keeps his at 7.5. It's the makeup of our chemistry of our water. It's the makeup of our water supplies distribution system. Their pipes are different than ours. The age is different. The water chemistry is different. And that is the reason why the EPA and the state did not put in that they are going to regulate the substance, because every water system is different. To do the water treatment plant, we had to go through a series of pilot studies to determine which system works best for our system. And I don't want, in the future, the way it's written, could be interpreted that Bob or his predecessor could not put something in that would benefit the water system just because it says any substance. And that's my concern. If the whole thing is on fluoride, then it should say fluoride. Because 2 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, it could be a different substance. We don't know. The contaminant list changes all the time, as they do have more and more studies.
Thank you.
So that's my comments.
Thanks. Did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I was gonna say, on the manganese, are you putting something in to reduce the amount of manganese in the water now?
Bob?
So would you not be able to do that?
Let me come up with something, Bryan. It's hydrofluorosic acid, by the way. It's a long word to pronounce over there. Yeah, I think in the memo that I've given all the town meeting members regarding the treatment plant, just jumping ahead a little bit down there, we've been doing 50% orthophosphate, 50% polyphosphate. It's a sequestering agent. Sequestering means just keeping in solution. So we've never really taken out manganese. We just keep it in. And once we get above a 0.1, it's very hard, to keep it in solution.
My point is, you're putting something in the water, though, that
Correct.
this bylaw might tell you you can't.
Possibly. My understanding, and talking to Bryan and looking at, he's taken off the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act, the EPA site. He's taken that language in there. There's some possible, I guess, interpretations like Jeff Holland had just mentioned for pH and some of these. And I had mentioned to Bryan, if you're going to speak about fluoride, we should keep it to fluoride. We shouldn't bring in some of these other matters, because it brings in all these other topics of conversation over there. If fluoride's the matter, then we should probably be doing that there. But just as a background, I'm certainly, as for town official, neutral on it, but I'll just give you a little background. From what I remember back, I think in the 1880s is where this whole thing from fluoride came. If you go out to the west, especially Colorado, and I think it started in Manitou Springs, if my memory serves correctly, a lot of the residents there had what they call mottling, brown staining on their teeth from excessive fluoride that's naturally in the western states, especially New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, alkaline type of soil. Fluoride's very high. So from that point, people said, oh, geez, there's something, in the water. It was naturally in the water. And then this whole thing came to be over there. Our fluoride is hydrofluorosilic acid. There's also sodium fluoride. There's other measures too. Doesn't always come from the mining, as that other lady was just referring to. Ours comes from North Carolina. It's some phosphate. We're taking out of phosphate deposits, not necessarily from the fertilizer industry. That some of that does happen. A lot of that international from China and stuff. That's certainly the case. Ours is all domestic. It's a little bit different. We'd be saving, I say, 10 to 12,000 on the fluoride. A small amount, like Bryan mentioned, on the KOH there. But if we built the treatment plant, I would recommend to the town meeting members and to everyone else involved that we still leave the provisions for fluoride in the plant, whether we put it in or not, because rather design it after. So we'd have the room there. We would not maybe have the equipment, but we still have to have the room and the provisions. So in the future, if the town meeting rejected it now and 2 years later on they said, yeah, let's put fluoride, we wouldn't have to redesign the whole treatment plant. So there's still some costs associated with that. We wouldn't have to pay the $26,000 for the equipment, but you still have to leave the space and build that at the plant. So just keep that in mind. And just on a personal note, since I was born and raised in Shrewsbury, and I was born in 1953, in Shrewsbury, first year they put in fluoride. So in our household and in most households, there was no such thing as boiled water. And I think a lot of people kind of remember what I'm talking about. You went to the kitchen sink and got water. There's no such thing as Poland Springs and all this. And that's everyone I grew up with. I mean, we only had town water. And, been drinking this since 1953 here in town. And I haven't really heard about too many incidences because of the water from 1953, with some 60-plus years ago. I'm dating myself a little bit here down here. But just from personally, yeah, drank a lot of water and drank it in town here and drank it since 1953. And I guess I'm the guinea pig. It was the very first year they put in, and been using it ever since over there, And we didn't have a choice. Today, I think people have a lot more choices, actually. I see most people go in houses, they have boiled water. They have Poland Springs there. Kids today, they don't go to the tap. They have the boiled water. You have the fluoride in the toothpaste. You have the gels and everything else there. So there's certainly a lot more choice than in 1953 that kind of, benefit what Bryan was saying there, too, on this there. There is other choices out there in the marketplace to get fluoride besides this. And I think Bryan's also correct that most of it goes on to the ground. It goes into bathroom fixtures, it goes into laundry, it goes into lawn water and whatever else. Very little is really consumed per se, especially by children and teenagers today. Everyone has boiled water. You go to a sporting event, everyone has boiled water. Kids come home, they go in the refrigerator, they want to get boiled water, out there. They don't go to the kitchen tap. I mean, see that very, very infrequently. And we're talking about a liter, which is 32.5 ounces, too. It's not just one 8-ounce glass. You'd have to drink, basically 4 glasses plus out there, almost 5 glasses, really, out there before everything's all set down there. So there's pros and cons to it, but, that's just my take on it. And again, I'm neutral whether it does it or not. Fluoride has a pH of about 2. Very acidic, so we have to put the KOH, like Bryan said, to raise it up over there. There's some savings in that, but the savings is somewhat nominal if you look at the total picture and the whole picture to the town over many years.
Thank you. Bryan, did you want to make any changes, or did you put that language in by choice as far as any substance?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the concerns. I've tried to address those right out in front of the presentation, just because, the language is very specific about any substance added for preventative healthcare purposes, so that alone would, if you're lowering the pH, let's not put in there for preventative healthcare purposes, put in there to lower the pH. And if with manganese, if they're adding something to the water to sequester the manganese, it's added to treat the water to make the water potable and safe. So this specific wouldn't fall under this bylaw. And then any of that kind of a middle ground, like chlorine, like the town engineer is mentioning, like chlorine, because there's the unrelated to the contamination of drinking water, that's saying, well, if you put chlorine because it's preventative health, no, you're treating the water, so it's saying, it has the exception already in there. So since it's in the, I wanted to be very specific because it's a town law, not to use my own language, because, you know, I don't want to just write it myself, because I think that would be more concerning or more risk for somebody coming back and challenging later, well, what did he mean by that when he put this in there? And this, I feel, is something that comes right from the Safe Water Drinking Act and has been there for, you know, decades and hasn't been challenged, so that's why I used it.
Mr. Sigelnik.
I mean, you're telling me that what you're saying is okay, but, and the other things shouldn't be taken into consideration in what you're saying. But that's your opinion. That is strictly your opinion. There's no hard law that says these other things should or shouldn't be considered health risks. So the next person, you know, like you, will come down and make something else an issue in the opposite and say you can't put it in the water because the way this is. That's going to be that person's opinion on what should or what should not be in the water.
Oh, excuse me, Mo.
Follow 18 Bullet Ave. Excuse me, to the point that this hasn't been challenged, that phrase has not been challenged. There's been no federal appellate court decision or state court decision, Supreme Court decision, that has invalidated or struck down a community's right to fluoridate water. So that is a different, that line is a different issue than whether or not fluoridation is legal. 70% of the communities, 67% of the communities in this country, they have fluoridated water. And in the past couple of years, 161 communities have added it. So this is not all one way, you know, we shouldn't have it, it's all bad. You could go on and on for hours about the literature, because for every argument that you can make for it, you can find an argument to make against it. So it really comes down to a community choice, I think.
Mr. Rutigliano.
Bryan, I heard the word fluoride probably 100 times over the past hour, and every resident that came up and spoke about fluoride. And your motion does not specifically state fluoride. I think your motion is going to get defeated because you're not specifically targeting fluoride, in my humble opinion.
The reason the state and the federal courts have not struck down that word verbiage is probably because what they're saying is that they're leaving it up to the local water suppliers to make that decision, or the local municipality. It basically, the law, what the wording says is no federal or state board officer or committee can regulate to the municipality what they can and cannot put in the water. So I think that's got to be that's a big difference between saying no town board. So therefore, the town can't do anything.
Let me just suggest, if you want to have more conversation about this before town meeting, you can always make adjustments before town meeting and share that at that time too, so you don't have to make decisions right now. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to make a comment to Bryan. I think I'm fluoride neutral too. I love the term that Jeff said. But one thing I do want to say that you have brought awareness, as you do, and I think that's important to the community. And as Mo said, you can find one article for, you can find one article against, and you can do that on and on and on. And I certainly am not qualified to say whether it's good or not good in the water, but I just want to applaud you for coming and for just bringing awareness to these types of things. So thank you.
Doing your homework.
Thank you.
All right, with that, Dale.
Dale Shotsky, 64 Barnard Street. By listening to the folks in the room tonight, it's pretty clear there has been, there probably always will be, an argument about fluoride in water. And given that it's been so controversial since it was first introduced, that's why so many places in the United States and around the world don't use fluoridation. And where it is controversial, it seems perfectly reasonable to support Mr. Moss's petition, because that gives people the choice to use fluoride at their choice. And with respect to the language in the article, I think it's very clear. It says, treat the water, don't treat the people. And that's what fluoride is put in there for. It's put in there to treat the people. And I think it's beneficial that the language stay the way it is, and that I would encourage members of the committee to consider this carefully and vote in favor, and vote to recommend it at special town meeting.
Thank you. Did I see someone else over there? Yes.
No, hi, my name is Margaret Lucas. I'm in precinct 7, and I don't have anything prepared. I'm just here to voice my opinion and say that I do support the bylaw. I would like the fluoride out of the water. And I think one thing to think about is when the public water supplies first became fluoridated, there weren't a lot of other options to get fluoride. There wasn't a lot of fluoride toothpaste. You couldn't go to the dentist in the 50s maybe and get a fluoride rinse. And now it's hard to find a toothpaste that doesn't have a fluoride in it. And it has been shown that it's more important to get it topically rather than ingest it and just have it in your bloodstream where it's not even really doing anything to your teeth. So for my family, I'd rather have it out of the water, and if I decide that I do want my children or myself to have it, I'd rather use a toothpaste where you just spit it out and you don't ingest it.
Thank you. Mr. Lukash.
Yep. I got an email from one of the proponents a week or two ago, and they had some comments in there about articles from the CDC, et cetera, et cetera. So I went to the CDC website. This was as of September 10th. And they had some questions, and the questions said, has the safety of community water fluoridation been evaluated? This is from the Center for Disease Control now. It says this. It said the answer was the safety and effectiveness of fluoride at levels used in community water fluoridation have been thoroughly reviewed by multinational scientific and public health organizations, U.S., Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, and the World Health Organization, using evidence-based reviews and expert panels. These panels include scientists with expertise in various health and scientific disciplines. They mentioned several. Conclusion, experts have weighed the findings and quality of available evidence and concluded that there is no association between water fluoridation and any unwanted health effects other than dental fluorosis. So, and then it says, are there any harmful health effects due to community water fluoridation? The safety and effectiveness of community water fluoridation continues to be supported by scientific evidence produced by independent scientists and summarized by panels of experts. Then I went to the U.S., there was a link to the U.S. Public Health Service. It says, for community water systems that add fluoride to their water, PHS recommends a fluoride concentration of 0.7 milligrams per liter, that's or parts per million, to maintain caries prevention benefits and reduce the risk of dental fluorosis. Finally, it says under dental fluorosis, it says the standard letter stated, this was people objecting, comments opposing fluoridation. The standard letter stated that the new recommendation would not eliminate dental fluorosis and cited its current prevalence among U.S. adolescents. In national surveys cited by the initial Federal Register notice, however, more than 90% of dental fluorosis in the United States is the very mild or mild form, most often appearing as barely visible, lacy white markings or spots on the enamel. EPA considered the severe form of dental fluorosis with staining and pitting of the tooth surface as the adverse health effect to be prevented. Severe dental fluorosis is rare in the United States, and its prevalence could not be estimated among adolescents in the national survey because there were too few cases among the survey participants examined to achieve statistical reliability. So it seems to me like both the Center for Disease Control and the U.S. Public Health Service is supporting fluoridation consistently, and they have a lot of evidence to back it up. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Kathy Fitzgerald, I live on Colonial Drive. I don't have a prepared statement, I just came to support mine.
Thank you.
I would love to talk at fluoride in the water, but that's not the discussion tonight, is whether or not I have the choice. And I don't. So I would like to have the choice to add fluoride to my life, to my teeth, or to my system, so I do support this.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we've covered it. I'm sure there'll be a lot more discussion
Great, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Now, we